Buongiorno, bentrovati. A me è il compito di introdurre questa sessione di lavoro, di confronto, che ha come focus il ruolo degli studi religiosi, della teologia e delle scienze religiose. Sono molto grato di questo invito, così come anche delle personalità che ci accompagneranno in questo confronto, in questo momento di ascolto e di condivisione. Il mio saluto vuole condividere due piccole istanze che possiamo tenere, credo, un po' sullo sfondo e che ci aiutano anche nel dire la profonda attualità di questo tema.
So this theme is topical. Fratelli Tutti is the encyclical by Pope Francis.
Delle religioni.
This encyclical highlights the importance of religions for the harmonious growth of people, societies, and contexts. At number 274, Pope Francis writes, starting from our faith experience and from wisdom that has been accumulating over the centuries, and learning from our weaknesses and falls as worshippers of different religions, we know that God is a very good wealth for our societies. Seeking God with a pure heart, avoiding ideologies. This allows us to acknowledge our brothers and sisters. The second very important aspect is the Constitutione Veritatis Gaudium, that in a sort of way, I'd say it is a provocation of religious studies. It triggers us to take into consideration a change in contexts. Especially, I would like to highlight two aspects from Veritatis Gaudium. The first one is the cross-disciplinary perspective, which is pointed as a pathway we need to follow. At the same time, it's very important to build networks and start dialogues. This morning, we will talk about a research project that indeed follows this perspective, i.e., protecting and safeguarding sources and the possibility that these sources become a way of growing and embracing this inclusion perspective. I would like to thank you all for being here, and I wish this session all the success.
I do think the topic we will discuss this morning is of utmost importance, both on the level of academia and on a societal level. In previous years, 2 research infrastructures were approved by the European Community in the context of Horizon 2020, REGES and Resilience. In these 2 projects, FSHIRE is the promoter, while many European research institutes with a multi-confessional and multi-religious background are involved in it. The 2 projects intend to show how important religious studies are in the European context. Both projects focus on infrastructure and promote technical and content-driven collaboration all over Europe. Being together with Professor Selderhaus, member of both REGES and Resilience, I am very much interested in what will be presented in this morning forum. Indeed, religious studies, not to confuse with Religionswissenschaften, covers a huge domain of research on religion, including sociology of religion, psychology of religion, history of religion, philosophy of religion, and theology. And I presume that apart from God, nobody is able to cover all these disciplines, at least not in a confessional and academic way. In a good number of American universities, religious studies focus on the phenomenon of religion in an interdisciplinary perspective, where both the internal and the external perspective are taken into account. However, in recent years, it has become clear that the so-called tension between the inner versus the outer perspective is the result of a superficial opposition of objective and subjective research. Hermeneutics have taught us that in the humanities, the subject and the object cannot be separated. And this is one of the driving forces behind Reires and resilience. In this matter, we are all on the same ship. In this context, I do think that this panel, presenting representatives of the Islamic, Catholic, Protestant, Orthodox tradition, who all have served their churches in positions that had to do with research and with the service to the community, that this panel will be of great help for our further reflection on the level of resilience. I think that I now give back the floor to our president, who will shortly introduce the first speaker. Oh, okay, I can continue. We first will have on a Zoom meeting, we have Yinglin Ma, the president of the Bishops' Conference of the Catholic Church in China. I presume it will be in English, and I think that we can give the floor to Yinglin Ma.
Hello, everyone. Chair of this meeting, distinguished guests, good morning, everyone. I'm deeply honored to be invited to participate in this conference. First of all, I would like to extend my heartfelt appreciation to the organizers of this year's G20 Interfaith Forum, which is centered on the same time to heal with parallel discussions exploring peace among cultures and understanding between religions. This session is focused on the role of religious studies, quite necessary at a time which is defined by the region pandemic, declining economy, and incessant regional turmoil and conflicts. Religious leaders with their spiritual and social influence have an extremely important role to play in promoting dialogue and cooperation among different religions, ethnic groups, and civilizations in order to uphold the social harmony and world peace. The Bible said, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God." When Jesus Christ began to preach the gospel of the kingdom of heaven and establish the church, he proclaimed the basic tenets of Catholicism, namely the Eight Beatitudes, which also serve as the norm and code of ethics of all Christians. Jesus Christ is a peacemaker for mankind. He proclaimed the edict of peace to mankind and told us to love each other like brothers and sisters without regard their race, skin color, culture, or nationality. He commands us to love one another, to forgive and repay grievances like our Heavenly Father. Jesus is the true peacemaker. He sacrificed himself through crucifixion to forgive human sins and create peace. He paved the way for understanding, forgiveness, and reconciliation between the Heavenly Father and the human and among humans themselves. He reconciles man to God and makes his church a sacramental symbol between man and God. For that, he is worshipped as a king of peace by all Christians. The Holy Church upholds the teachings of Christ, leading Christians to maintain order, respect authority, uphold justice, and practice charity, with strong desires to oppose wars and eliminate injustice. The Church calls on all of us to pray for the world peace and human happiness in the promotion of social harmony and stability. The Catholic Church believes that everyone is created equal and should respect the life of others given by God. No one with any excuses should take the lives of innocent people. Peace and tranquility stems from reverence for the moral obligation, moral humanity, and natural rules and orders created by God. Therefore, we must respect the rights and dignity of others, the creation in them by God, and respect the sovereignty of other countries. It requires one to protect the order and injustice of human society, if needed, willing to share what they have with their poor brothers and sisters. Peace is upheld through charity with a sincere love for Christ as a foundation. Love is forgiveness, understanding, and reconciliation. Love is selfless sacrifice and wholehearted dedication. Therefore, it encourages people to share their wisdom, ability, and wealth endowed by God with others, and fully commit themselves to the lifelong service of helping others and repaying society. The faith tells us that peace and tranquility comes from the inner heart, with a deep insight and grasp of the meaning of life. Inner peace and freedom should be pursued by all Christians to preserve the integrity and conscience, enrich the joy of faith, and uphold the lofty aspirations. With our Lord leading the way, we should bring the peace of God to all by being the messenger and instrument of harmony and peace. As Saint Francis delivered in his peace prayer, Lord, make us instruments of the peace. Where there's hatred, let's sow love. Where there's injury, pardon. Where there's discord, union. Where there's doubt, faith. Where there's despair, hope. Where there's darkness, light. Where there's sadness, joy. We strive to create a social atmosphere of unity, harmony, and benevolence, and work together to maintain the beauty of human nature and create real and lasting peace in the world. For that, we will be called children of God. President Xi advocates building a community with a shared future for all mankind, building a clean and beautiful world of lasting peace, universal security, common prosperity, with openness and tolerance, which is in line with the universal pursuit of all people from different civilizations and religions. It expresses China's desire to seek peaceful development and pursue win-win cooperation with other countries, an idea that won the hearts and minds of Chinese people from all religious backgrounds and ethnicities, as well as like-minded people in the world who uphold justice and human conscience, who work to facilitate national development, social progress, and world peace. The concept of community with a shared future for mankind is a value embodying the profound wisdom of the Chinese nation in judging the future of mankind amid development trends. The same also holds true for religions. The future of every nation and every ethnic group is closely intertwined. We should stick together through thick and thin to turn the home where we were born and raised into a harmonious family. And we should turn the dream of people from all around the world into a beautiful reality. Therefore, we call on all religious leaders to promote mutual political respect and equal consultation among countries, to resolutely abandon the Cold War mentality and power politics, and to promote dialogue over confrontation, partnerships over alliances. We should resolve differences and disputes through dialogue and negotiation. We should resolve differences. We should vehemently reject all forms of terrorism and extremist ideas. We should facilitate free trade and investments and lead globalization toward a more open, inclusive, balanced, and win-win direction. We should respect the diversity of civilizations, transcend cultural barriers, and eliminate cultural supremacism through mutual learning. We should promote religious exchanges and cooperation and uphold mutual tolerance and common development. In particular, with the sudden onset of the pandemic, we call on all countries to join hands in fighting the virus with science. Instead of politicizing the origin of the disease, we should work together to distribute the urgently needed materials to poverty-stricken areas and share useful wisdom. Finally, I sincerely hope this conference will deepen our sense of mission and responsibility in forging friendly cooperation among religions, civilizations, and countries. Let's join hands in building a community with shared future and jointly promote harmonious development and world peace. May the merciful God bless and protect us. And we hope this pandemic will end soon. Thank you.
Many thanks to the President of the Bishops' Conference of the Catholic Church in India, who underlined the importance of religion for peace, charity, wisdom, and ended his speech with an appeal to work together and to collaborate to share the useful wisdom. Our second speaker of this morning is Bujar Spayu, Grand Mufti of Albania. He studied theology in
Honorable participants, I thank the Foundation for Religious Studies for organizing such a good conference. I feel honored and privileged to be here in this important event, which promotes peace among cultures and understanding between religions. Today, I am here in the capacity of the chairman of the Albanian Muslim community. This religious organization represents the largest religious community in Albania. I represent a relatively small country in terms of the geographic space, but this small country is among the world's unique nations in terms of respecting freedom of religion and religious tolerance. The connection between religious tolerance and stable societies is very important. In Albania, religious communities and religious leaders have always played an important role in our society, and religion has not only been an integral part of our community, but also has actively contributed in its development stages. Taking into account my country and in its history, I can say the religion has been present in every important moment when key decisions have been taken. If we focus only on the developments of 20-21 centuries for Albania, we will notice that religion has had a great impact on key decision-making processes related to state building and state formation. My country, Albania, is among smaller countries in Europe and geographically, but it may be only country in European continent where have never been facing or knowing religious conflicts. This religious tolerance has been cultivated over the centuries. The territory of Albania has been used as battlefield by the big empires such as Roman, Byzantine, Ottoman, and different have passed through. All these empires which had different religious beliefs, but religion has never been cause of division or conflict between the Albanians. In my country, the different religious beliefs are and will continue to be unifying element among us and not a divisive characteristic of Albanian. Honorable participants, my country is among the only one in European continent that the number of Jew people was tenfolded during the Second World War. More explicitly, Albanian people constituted by a Muslim majority population sheltered over 2,000 Jews during this period. Jewish people were not handed over, and the anti-Semitic concept was never embraced or recognized in my country. Later, the communist regime during the period 1945 to 1991 has tried with all possible means to damage religion. All religious faiths were severely hit as clerics were imprisoned and killed, worship places were destroyed, and religious communities' properties were confiscated. This terrible attack against all religious faiths in Albania have reached its peak in 1967 when Albania was declared through its constitution as an atheist country. Thus, it became the first atheist country in the world which faith was banned by the constitution. Despite this, the need for religious faith could be felt among the Albanian people. Thus, communists destroyed worship places and imprisoned, exiled and killed clerics, but they never achieved to destroy their soul. Thankfully, with the fall of the Iron Curtain during 89-90, the atheistic constitution was changed in Albania. Religious freedom was integrated in the new adapted constitution during the 90s, which continue to be part even today. Democracy, education, human rights, freedom, love, respect, or dialogue are important themes even in religious studies. From all of these themes, I will briefly mention just a few of them. Firstly, let me focus on democracy and let me go a little bit deeper into Islam's perspective over democracy. Personally, I consider and see democracy as the only and right system to lay the foundations of any institution. As such, religion should contribute to the development of this system in order to transform and make it as much as possible perfect for human being. At the center of democratic system is human being, and at the center of Islam is also a human being. Thus, religious studies should play an important role on consolidating human rights and fundamental freedoms. Also, religion gives an important place to the education and learning processes. This binomial affects directly the quality of life of an individual. We at the Albanian Muslim community have education as the main part of our vision, and we consider it as a key element in enhancing human capacities and position in the society, in fighting ignorance and eradicating poverty. In this context, we have established and are running a network of schools in different cities of Albania as well as a university. Through these education institutions, we aim to educate the new generations with contemporary standards and to build a good citizen with human values and virtues. A good citizen is also a good Muslim. Education helps our development through which our spiritual, intellectual, and physical dimensions are improved. Although knowledge is a value in itself, learning camps to make knowledge our guidance in life and to illuminate our path for improving ourselves. With the madrasas and the university, we aim to preserve our tradition in preparing middle and senior religious staff in country. This also enables to preserve the unity of the Islamic interpretation in Albania. However, today we face huge challenges and I am aware of them. But what I deem my biggest challenge is the correct interpretation of Islam in Albania and the preservation of the religious dialogue and tolerance in the country. We, as a religious community in Albania, are also focused on interfaith dialogue and coexistence. With other religious communities in Albania, in October 2017, we have established the Interreligious Council of Albania. Through this council, we aim to find common ground and to intensify interfaith cooperation to positively influence various decisions and developments in our country and beyond. This council serves to coordinate and enhance interaction through the creation of a permanent dialogue roundtable and bring together Albanian key religious communities in joint initiatives or various activities. This is an amazing contribution to continue preserving our historical tradition. As mentioned even previously, the Albanian Muslim community throughout its history has supported the key development of Albania. We have consistently supported Albania's entry into NATO, and with the Interfaith Council, we have been calling upon the political parties for dialogue and cooperation to achieve the integration of Albania into Euro-Atlantic alliances. Finally, another key point that is a high priority of Albanian Muslim community and that we have made a lot of efforts to prevent is violent extremism and radicalization. In close cooperation with the state institution and our international partners, Muslim community of Albania is actively engaged in preventing this phenomenon by designing, managing, and implementing projects in various cities or regions of Albania, as well as the Muslim community of Albania has been arranging and organizing conferences, seminars, and training for imams and other relevant actors to learn more about our religion. The institution that I have the privilege to lead has the main principle to proper and correct interpretation of Islam. We permanently train our theological staff to convey the message of God to our believers rightfully and with love. Dear participants, Islam is religion of peace and tolerance. This is firmly embedded in the heart and mind of every Muslim believer, whom I have the honor to represent today. But I'd like to emphasize that tolerance and the right of religious freedom is a process for each individual. And as such, we have the obligation to stimulate this process for everyone. Finally, I pray to God that the results of these meetings are used practically and find application everywhere. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Grandmaster Mufti, for this very rich presentation in which you underlined this particular situation of Albania in the context of Europe, and in which you also underlined the importance of religion before the First World War, before the Second World War, underlining that religion never caused division in your country. And you ended your remarkable speech with an appeal to tolerance and to human freedom, and that it is a process of each individual, and that everybody has to take his common responsibility. Our next speaker is Archbishop Nikitas Loulias. He is the Metropolitan Archbishop of Great Britain and Thyatira, and he was from March 2007 onwards up to his election as Archbishop of Great Britain, 4 years director of the Patriarch Athanasius Orthodox Institute in Berkeley, California, so very much involved in religious studies.
Good morning to all, and thank you, especially to the organizers of this forum and this panel for allowing me to speak. I do have one note of exception, and with your understanding, please. It would have been nice to have one woman on the panel, so we might hear also a female voice. Of course, we're speaking as educators or people of position, but we need to be more inclusive, and that would have been an interesting and proper dimension. Our world, our faith traditions, and even our religious communities are facing a series of crises. We can hardly keep up with the various religious, political, and ideological disputes that lurk behind a facade of peace and erupt into violent conflict once the friction becomes too much to bear. Ancient hostilities still fester, new disputes take root daily. Time and space have been compressed by our incredible accomplishments in transportation technology and telecommunications. Good news travels faster than ever, but so do discord and outrage. Fundamentalist groups, especially, will not hesitate to use every available means to impose their own worldview and understanding as the only acceptable expression to truth. History, of course, repeats itself, but this does not lessen the tragedy and horror of war and destruction, nor does it invalidate our responsibility to strive for enduring peace. Never has this been truer than today, when our tightly interconnected global society means that, for better or worse, no one lives in isolation from the rest of the world. Our neighbors, potentially everyone, all the time. This was the case, of course, before the COVID-19 pandemic struck. But if there were any doubts, they have now been erased. So while these problems are not necessarily new to humanity, the threat they pose is greater than ever. And the need for paths toward real, meaningful coexistence is more imperative and more urgent now than ever. Two of the biggest obstacles in hindering our progress are lack of empathy and a lack of awareness. Empathy is a prerequisite for fruitful dialogue and is a matter of personal disposition. Awareness is a product of diligent study and honest inquiry. Please allow me to share a brief story with you that will illustrate a disposition towards dialogue. As clergy educators and politicians and the other actors responsible for promoting dialogue and discussion, we may at times overlook the significance of teaching people that dialogue is a way of life, a comprehensive worldview, and not just occasionally a tool for when need arises. In a monastery remote and distant, 2 monks lived far from the world and its ways. One day, the one monk said to his brother, "I must go to the city tomorrow." And so this came to pass, and the one brother left the monastery to visit the city. On his way, he saw 2 people arguing, and he stopped in amazement. He had never seen an argument before. He said to himself, "I must share this experience with my brother, as I am aware that he has also never experienced such a thing." So the monk went to the city, and upon his return to the monastery, he told his brother what had happened. He said, "I saw an argument taking place, and I was amazed." And the second monk replied, "I have never seen and experienced an argument, and not sure as to what you mean." So the first monk said, "I will explain. Let us take this brick and put it between us, and I will say it is my brick, and you will say it is yours. And we will go back and forth as to whose brick it is, and so we will argue." The first monk took the brick and placed it between them and said with a strong voice, "Brother, this is my brick." And then the second monk looked up and replied, "Yes, brother, if you say so." This brief narrative speaks of 2 realities, conflict and cooperation. They are the same realities that manifest in those who engage in the study of religion and the pursuit of truth. On the one hand, we have so-called students guided by diverse or indifferent spirit, divisive or indifferent spirit. They wish to build the walls with bricks of hate and reinforce them with misconceptions. On the other hand, we have those imbued with the spirit of dialogue, true students that desire to build bridges of cooperation with the bricks of language, understanding, and mutual respect. We all know the evils and challenges presented to us by fanaticism and what the likes, which are fueled by the seemingly insatiable spirit of blind aggression, frustration, and willful ignorance. It is for this reason that the spirits of empathy and dialogue need to be fortified with knowledge and skills, the true awareness of self and the other. Theologians and scholars of religion come in many varieties with different foci, areas of expertise and methodologies. Again, some may engage in research while others are dedicated to education, but all share 2 basic requirements: to first be well versed in their own particular tradition and to have at least a fundamental knowledge of other major world religions. Theologians who are committed to honest and rigorous academic inquiry soon realized what Max Mueller, who was considered to be the founder of religious studies, meant when he said, and he took Goethe's famous phrase and adapted to the study of different religions: "He who knows one knows none." One must go beyond what is familiar in order to return and really know where they started. It is precisely this characteristic of religious studies that situates itself as an ideal trailblazer for engaging with diverse viewpoints, for the building of bridges of empathy and the understanding that we so desperately need, and even of the defending of religious traditions purposely from over-divisive, oversimplification, and superficiality of fundamentalist distortions. Isolation for the serious scholar of religion is not an option. We as world leaders and educators need to commit to the fact that education plays a pivotal role in peaceful coexistence. We need to expand our theological training and education to include a serious survey of other beliefs, even at an introductory level. And we need to revisit our own curricula and constantly deepen our familiarity with the entire corpus of our own faith tradition in order to both safeguard it and to be prepared to share, explore, and discuss it with others. This is the crucial work we have before us if we want to raise our voices to defend human dignity, if we want to diminish the oftentimes brutal consequences of discord and misunderstanding, and to share together the fruits of peace and understanding. Each person of goodwill is capable of contributing in his or her own unique way to a better and brighter future. For those of us who serve as religious leaders and teachers of theology, we have a rich and privileged treasure, a trove of resources to work with. My prayer and my hope is that we open our eyes not only to teach those that have been called to teach, but to never cease learning ourselves and enriching our own lives. Thank you very much. And I apologize, I forgot my glasses.
Thank you very much for this wonderful intervention in which you emphasized that nobody lives in isolation, in which you emphasized that we all have to study up to the end of our lives, which is a good advice even for professors in theology. I now give the floor to Professor Hermann Selderhaus. Hermann Selderhaus is rector of the Theological University of Apeldoorn. He is an expert in the study of Calvinism and its reception in the Netherlands, and he is internationally appreciated for his commitment in Revo 500, but also in the consortia Geiges and Resilience. And he is a great promoter of the study of reformations. So you have the floor.
Thank you for this kind introduction, and thank you for coming out this morning. It's for me a privilege and a great joy to be part of resilience that has been mentioned, and that's also the context of the session this morning. I want to focus on one of the disciplines in resilience in theology. And I have some bullets, some points to communicate and maybe to introduce to a discussion, and I want to start with a thesis. And my thesis for this morning is, if theologians do what their name says they do, they have immense possibilities to reduce extremism. So if theologians do what their name says they do, they have immense possibilities to reduce extremism. First, theologians are academics. And academics are trained to think and to analyze and to do research, for example, on origins and developments of dogmas, convictions, and standpoints, to do research on historical developments and on present situations, and to elaborate models for the future. So the aspect of theologians as academics, thinking and training others to think, I think that is an important aspect that we should meet up to again. Secondly, theologians speak about God, which means they have knowledge and they speak about a dimension that is vertical, which gives them opportunities to enter conversations on items, issues, thoughts that go beyond what we see. So theologians speak about God and about what God communicates. And that means that theologians are experts, or are supposed to be experts, in the exegesis of texts. And also, and that's the context of my thesis, text on the use of violence, text and context on how to legitimize or reject violence from whatever sort. And I think theologians are called for action in this field to do this exegesis of these texts that are often used and misused. Third, theologians speak about reconciliation and sacrifice. They have special knowledge about reconciliation and sacrifice, not just words. The previous speaker, he had in his speech a little history. I have one also. When it comes to speaking, there is this man, he is in a balloon and he's lost, and the balloon goes down and he doesn't know where he is. And then he is so close that he can see someone walking the street. And then he yells from the balloon down to the man in the street and says, "Do you know where I am?" And the man says, "You are in a balloon." And then the man in the balloon says, "You must be a theologian." And the man says, "How come you know?" He says, "Because what you say is true, but it doesn't help me anything." So not just speak about reconciliation, but also what it means, and that in relation to sacrifice, because there is a close relation between sacrifice and reconciliation. Not only reconciliation needs sacrifice, but also results in sacrifice. And the combination of these two terms are, I think, essential when it comes to dealing with extremism. The next point. Theologians are professional pessimists, optimists, and realists. First, professional pessimists, so that we get this over with, this item. They know that there is not always so much to expect from human beings. Please allow me to refer to this famous word of Martin Luther, that Christians are simul justus et peccator. This simul aspect, justus, is what we all think we are, justified and just. But we often forget that not only the others, but also we are also peccatores, sinners, and that's a reality. We as theologians are also optimists. That means we are convinced that people can change. In most religions, we speak about conversion in whatever terms, in whatever dimensions, but conversion means a radical change of people's attitude. That makes theologians optimistic, and they should spread and share that optimism. Theologians are also realists. Realists meaning that they know, and they should communicate this, that there is in this world the presence of evil. And it's not something out there, but it's something that is part of human realities. Realists also in the sense that there is what I call a permanence of failure. With all the projects that we intend, also mentioned during this conference, we also know that things can fail. And this realism can help keep us away from illusions. The next thing is that theologians speak about human beings and about their responsibility towards mankind and creation. I do not want to elaborate on that because this has been said in other sessions as well. Theologians train those that communicate with others. That, I think, is also an essential element when it comes to dealing and fighting extremism. Theologians communicate, but they also train communicators, those that communicate with others. For example, with children and young people, essential element, and also a target for extremism. We all know about this. Theologians know that religions in general have an eschatology, a view on the future, on what will come, or on who will come, or who will not come. They have a view on the future in the sense that theologians have a view on what awaits us and how that eschatology affects the behavior I think there is an essential task for theologians from this eschatological viewpoint. To see it in brief, in politics, there is often short-term planning. Planning as long as I am in power as politician. But from the theological perspective, there is a long-term view, and it's coming from the end, eschatology. And like I said, eschatology is, I think, an issue that has been often neglected in how people are motivated or what it does with their behavior. To come to a conclusion, theologians work with words, and they work with the power of words. Words that can hurt and words that can heal. And therefore, I think that theologians are now called to speak, and to speak with clarity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Selderhaus, for this thesis approach. And I do hope that theologians in the Netherlands do not only say something about balloons, but also about practical wisdom.
We try.
Thus telling the people that it was the church street or something like that. Thank you very much for this wonderful lecture. I now give the floor to Ambrogio Bongiovanni. Ambrogio Bongiovanni is the director of the Gregorian Center for Interreligious Studies at the Pontifical Gregorian University. He is not a Jesuit, but a layperson, and he is president of the Magus Foundation. He's also a professor at the Faculty of Missiology of the Gregorian University. Professor, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Sorry.
As you can see, even theologians use the new technique.
Sorry.
And hope that it will work. On Sunday, we were all witnesses of the fact that the technique did not work with the Dutch politician. Today, I have the impression.
That is true. So thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. And thank you very much for the invitation to this important conference, and also to the chairperson for his presentation. Let me start, first of all, with the personal experience of my life. I lived in India for a few years, and before that I studied some texts of different religions written by eminent scholars, and also participating in some courses. And I had the impression to be embedded in that context and to know many things about those religions. But living directly with the people in their daily life, in their deep religiosity, in their spiritual journey, I learned many things from them, from the people, and I had the experience of sharing my faith. Actually, that experience of encounters with people recalled me the pedagogical approach of Jesus Christ in the Gospel, meeting the differences. I would like to highlight a few key points and challenges for the future of religious studies in the direction of the interreligious studies. Though the interest for interreligious dialogue is growing in the world from different points of view, we cannot deny that, especially in Europe, there is a persistent modernist anti-religious feeling and practice are prevailing and ruling in most of the Western countries for so many reasons and in different ways on understanding the secular character of the states. In contradiction to this point, according to the Pew Research Center, especially Christian identity in Western Europe is associated with forms of nationalism and negative sentiments towards immigrants and religious minorities. In general, we have to consider a persistent opposition to religious life with the consequent widespread of religious illiteracy, which affects many fields of the public sphere since the beginning of the life of our children. On the other side, the center of gravity of Christianity is not anymore in the northern side of the world, or in Europe, or in the West, but it is in the southern part of the world. And moreover, we have to say that most of the people and peoples in the world are religious. Somehow we are living a crisis, I would say. What kind of crisis we discuss in these days? A crisis, I would say, also of the modern paradigm, a systemic crisis connected with an ethical crisis and a crisis of religious values. In order to avoid any form of exploitation of religions, it is necessary to consider interreligious dialogue in its real meaning of a religious dialogue, and namely a dialogue among people of different religious traditions, and a shift from an idea of prevailing institutional dialogue to a relational dimension of dialogue. So interreligious dialogue cannot be understood as a sort of civil religion, where religions are esteemed only when they support the interest of governments. If the states and governments would consider seriously interfaith dialogue, they have to consider more seriously the internal moral values of religions and their theological system and interpretation. At the same time, we are witnessing to a polarization of being religious today. Fundamentalisms, absolutism versus relativism, which means also cultural relativism. Both poles are obstacles to dialogue. After more than 50 years from Nostra Aetate, the declaration of the Catholic Church of the Vatican, the Second Vatican Council on the relation of the Church towards the people of other different religious traditions, in the Christian context, the demand for knowledge of other religions is becoming more and more frequent. This shows the need to live the Christian faith authentically in relation to believers of other religious traditions and in cooperation with them. For instance, also the document of the Abu Dhabi document of human fraternity shows also this search for cooperation. I have also to admit that beyond the risk of that political exploitation, awareness to education for dialogue, even in the more general form of intercultural education, is evident also in the public institutional sphere and has become, by some years, a point of reference for the development of a critical conscience, at the same time respectful of the various points of view. This is a very positive fact, which challenges a traditional education and responding fully to the complexity of our times. But a new pedagogical approach has the task of making people aware of such a complexity, that is the complexity of our society, to lead the faith in relation to others, in a continuous search for meaning and discernment, rather than in the fixity and the closure of a static identity, which is assumed a priori to be the only good, pure and absolute, without any confrontation with others. It means also to shift towards a spirituality of dialogue, which can be considered an inner path of dialogue. A great Indian poet intellectual, as Rabindranath Tagore, asserted that education should not only provide information, but foster the integral development of the individual in harmony with the universal. For the effectiveness of interreligious studies, as we have defined it, it is necessary to move towards an integrated, systematic, and contextualized education that makes the believer and the students more mature and capable on a spiritual and theological level of being more familiar with his own faith as well as with the faith of the other. Highlighting the complementarity and contemporaneity of these three characteristics means integration, the characteristic of this education, integrated, systematic, and contextualized, might seem utopian in the current marked sectorization of knowledge, which often loses its sight of globality and unity. Rather, it should be seen as a perspective to strive for and as a guiding framework in which we can develop the formative process. Interreligious studies need different educational realities and experiences to integrate into the synergic activation of processes, which systematically organize knowledge, doctrines, and truth in an organic way, harmonizing theoretical and methodological aspects at the same time. Finally, the context of reference are to be considered seriously. A certain preparation and competence should precede the practice, not only to learn about other religions, but also to help correct or to remove prejudices, misinformation, and fears towards believers of other traditions. Education for dialogue would therefore take shape in the context of religious teaching in a plural, not abstract context, but in the form of relationship with people who in turn represent cultures, worldviews, and religious traditions with their values. This allows both the discovery of the difference as a value and the strengthening of or greater awareness of one's own identity, not in opposition to the others, but next to them. It would be to activate paths that lead to a change of view and to an intellectual and spiritual discipline to allow for a pilgrimage towards other religious traditions. In fact, a very positive change in the approach must be recognized to cultures in the field of education. So the centrality of interreligious studies is placed on the self in relation to other, overcoming the objectification of the other and even religions, passing through the recognition of subjectivity and moving towards intersubjectivity in the perspective to build a community we. The central role of interreligious studies is in order to help to discern the differences, both from the point of view of values and these values. We talked about, for instance, the structures of sin or the evil in the society. Then to reach a mutual enrichment and a fertilization of the cultures to which they belong. All this can only be achieved through adequate provision to listening and openness combined with cultural skills that will allow to increase the awareness of cultural and theological differences and to prepare the ground on which dialogue can be activated. I just would like a few words, because my time is almost over, on interreligious studies beyond the science of religions and comparative studies. We have to recognize that religious science developed in the 19th century, initially based on Western categories and on the idea of a superiority of Christianity. Only later, through one deeper study of other religious traditions, it is recognized that such a set of discipline did not do justice to the complexity of many aspects of religions in their particular context and in the personal community reception of truth of faith. On the other hand, the comparative studies of religions were often based on a comparison between similarities, where the differences are neglected. Indeed, a comparison would be meaningful if two principles were kept. Attention, first of all, to the historical context and settings, and particularly of religions, describing adequately how the different elements of a religion find meaning in their particular context. And secondly, its construction based on a broad knowledge of the systems, on the systems that form or which in the, or that particular religion is included. So I think that we can try a balanced approach, working within these two extremes between, a sort of Orientalism and postmodernism, and critically redefine the categories proposed above. So for these reasons, I think that we need to pay attention not to reduce interreligious dialogue to a sort of a comparative study of religions or a religious science, but to think it as a study of an interaction between different experiences of faith, where religious experience is a response of faith to a personal encounter with God. In dialogue, therefore, the understanding of another religion passes not only through the consideration of systems and aspects of a particular context, but also through the analysis of the role of religion in the people's life, through the meaning that it assumes for them. So this study will bring students, will help students to understand that religions are not only objects of studies, of a asceptical study, but a way of being and living of people in the progressive history of humanity. I will conclude with the words of Pope Francis in his final speech, concluding speech in Naples at the end of June of 2019, during the conference on the theology after Veritatis Gaudium in the context of the Mediterranean. And recalling also the experience of the Abu Dhabi document. I will read it in Italian, so you can hear the translation.
How could we safeguard one another in one single human family? How could we nourish a coexistence which is tolerant and peaceful, thus translating in authentic brotherhood? How could we make sure in our communities can prevail the brotherhood of those different from us because they belong to a different culture and religion? How can religions be a brotherhood pathway instead of separation walls? These questions ask for a multi-layer interpretation and demand for listening, studying, and confrontation and dialogue to promote liberation, peace, brotherhood, and justice. We have to convince ourselves it's about starting processes, not to define spaces or occupying spaces. It's about starting processes.
On the study of religions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Bongiovanni. I hope that we will have the time to come back to a very important point you raised about religious literacy, religious illiteracy. I now give the floor to Martino Diaz, who is the scientific director of the Oasis International Foundation, which is a research institute founded by Cardinal Scola in 2004. It is an institute that focuses on the interaction and mutual understanding between Christians and Muslims, with a special focus on Christian communities in the Middle East. So you're really the symbiosis of our morning. You have the floor.
Thank you very much. A man said to Dirar ibn al-Qaqa, if you say just one word, you will listen to 10. The other answered, if you say 10 words, you will listen to none. So my own word, or rather my 10-minute intervention today, moves from the title of this panel, The Role of Religious Studies. This title involves a metaphor, the role, taken from the word of theater. Continuing along the same metaphor, I will ask two related questions. Who are the actors of religious studies? And second, who is the audience? And let us start from the second question, which we could also rephrase as the role of religious studies for societies at large, and more specifically, for global leaders, since this is what the G20 Interfaith Forum is all about. In my decade-long experience at the Oasis International Foundation, I have grown more and more convinced that including the religious dimension in political and geopolitical analysis, which is one of the things we do at Oasis, among others, both challenges some of our assumptions and improves our understanding of many phenomena. It challenges our assumptions that human beings are basically selfish, power-driven entities, always acting according to an economic calculation of advantages and disadvantages, benchmarks, metrics, and then we see that this fails in understanding, for instance, the reality in Afghanistan. No, they are not. They can sacrifice themselves for something they believe is worth the sacrifice, be it something right, the martyr, or something wrong, the suicide attacker who is parodying the martyr. And at the same time, religious studies improve our understanding of many phenomena, again, both positive, resilience, networks of solidarity, and negative, fundamentalism, for instance. Yet, as any other kind of knowledge, religious studies stand in dialectical relationship to the society in which they are pursued. Societies put forth some needs. Today, for instance, healing, countering violence, supporting the ecological transition, and favoring such vague things as inclusiveness and non-discrimination. And religious scholars are supposed to set their mind on them. There is, thanks God, still some room for apparently purposeless research, the usefulness of useless knowledge, to quote Abraham Flexner, the founder of the first Institute of Advanced Study in the world. But broad and large, nobody can fully escape these conditionings, which we could also take when they are sincerely motivated as God's calls. There are two risks lurking here. The first is to become ideological, that is, to do research whose findings are already written in a premise or in the donor's name. The other is, in order to avoid ideology, to turn insignificant. That is, to study subjects that only interest a tiny bunch of pundits, from bad to worse, or from the pan to the embers, dalla padella alla brace, as we say in Italian. What is the way out of this conundrum? In my opinion, if it is true that religious studies cannot escape the conditioning imposed by the context, their true task consists in relativizing the framework in which we live. After all, if a definition of religion can be attempted, it certainly has to do with a quest for the absolute. If God is the absolute, we are not. Our social and cultural structures are not. This realization, which is typical of our pluralistic age, can pave the way to cultural relativism, for sure. But this is not the only possible outcome. It can also allow for something at once more modest and more crucial, a critical look at one's own culture. Indeed, in the Christian understanding, even the most Christian culture or polity, which is not the case of the West today, cannot claim to exhaust the riches of revelation. There is always something missing until all of us come to the unity of the faith and of the knowledge of the Son of God, to maturity, to the measure of the full stature of Christ. Ephesians 4:13. Let me give you a quick example of what I mean. Nowadays, religions are kindly requested to get people vaccinated, to teach them to respect the environment, and to spread peace. And in these forums, several politicians have voiced these concerns, which are often based on an not spoken premise that religions are for simple-minded people who need some imagery to be persuaded to do things because they cannot understand abstract rational truths. Pure Ibn Rushd, pure Averroes in postmodern grab. Well, I would contend that religious studies can do much more than this, and to the benefit of politics too. It's like if you have a Ferrari and you just use this car to buy some bread from a nearby bakery. Okay, it's good, but you can do more with the Ferrari if you like. They can call into question the very assumptions on which these requests are based. Take the issue of environment. The kind of green theology many decision makers envision is a collection of inspirational sayings about the beauty of nature, the value of water, the care for animals, a bit of St. Francis, a touch of Sufism, a drop of Tikkun Olam, and you are done. Religious studies become thus a cover matter for the Sunday cultural supplement. But religious studies, or theology, if we dare say the word, can go further and deconstruct the nihilism underpinning our secular framework. For instance, they can do away with the illusion that the ecological problem is just an issue of technology. Let's find new ways to produce energy and the whole matter will be fixed once and for all. No. A critical outlook to my own culture tells me that the root of the ecological crisis is the Nietzschean will to power, Wille zur Macht, that is part and parcel of contemporary nihilism, and its loss of the sense of limit. It's an anthropological problem, not a technological one. So yes, religions can tell people to separate their waste, but they can and must do much more by activating the notion of creation. For instance, I'm thinking here of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, because I have no expertise in other religions. They can expose the roots of the crisis rather than curing its symptoms. And that was very briefly. Who is doing religious studies nowadays? The answer varies significantly from context to context, but as other speakers have emphasized, there is a common need of doing things together in interreligious scholarly conversation, where the scholarly is as important as the interreligious, in my view. This said, religion is a tricky thing because it asks you for your personal assent. But then how can you get involved into something you don't believe or you only partially believe? This problem was acutely felt by the French Orientalist Louis Massignon. From his own experience, he came up with a thought-provoking answer. You cannot feign yourself something you are not. For instance, you cannot feign yourself a Muslim while you are a Christian, or vice versa. But you can ask for hospitality to the religious other, the kind of sacred hospitality that Abraham gave to his mysterious guests. I happen to have some experience of interreligious meetings, and not rarely one returns home with a feeling that with all goodwill, the discussions remained rather shallow and generic. In my view, part of the problem depends on the fact that participants are generally supposed to translate their own views into a meta-language, secular meta-language. However, much is lost in the process of translation because the meta-language conveys a functional meaning, but it does not nourish the spirit. And interestingly, many people attending interreligious meetings compensate for this loss by enjoying well-prepared liturgies in their own tradition. Yet I feel ill at ease in how to transition from one level to the other. How do I convey the richness of the liturgy to which I have just taken part into non-denominational categories? Sacred hospitality offers a different perspective. Take the subject of this meeting, time to heal. I can understand what healing is by translating some Islamic, Jewish, or Buddhist principles into secular values, but I can also ask for hospitality to these traditions to witness how this principle is understood, lived, and put into practice in the faith experience, from the abstract universal to the concrete universal, to quote Hegel. It is more demanding, but also more enriching. And this is my humble suggestion for interreligious studies and the actors involved, and perhaps also for future G20 interfaith fora. Thank you.